Hi everyone, this is Danelli. I wanted to go ahead and make this video on the cost of a BA and walk everyone through like basically what tuition really costs and the different like breakdowns for uh, attending college or university per year. I'm specifically going to use UC Santa Barbara as an example. There are, there should be a breakdown of tuition costs for any and every university online. So you can definitely access this information. It should be public information for anybody to be able to look up and review. They should be able to break it down for you, like undergraduate costs versus graduate costs, resident versus non-resident, and essentially, also you can track how much tuition has changed throughout the years. Typically, they will post like the most recent years, maybe up to 5 years of tuition costs and how much it has changed over the years. Occasionally, the fees do get hiked up. I do want to say that something about tuition for different levels of education. Obviously, unless you choose to go to a private school or like kind of get a private tutor or some kind of like independent educational assistance or help, like K through 12 is covered by the government. So if you attend a public school, you generally don't have to pay anything. And if you qualify, sometimes, you'll even qualify for free meals. That being said, college university is optional. The government only helps or covers a certain amount, and the way that they cover costs is generally through scholarships or through grants. So you do have to qualify for those, and they tend to have their own specific way of assessing students and seeing if a student qualifies for different types of grants and scholarships. Generally, they will look at your past academic work and see how well you've performed. And sometimes for things like scholarships, you do have to apply and get funding for that. I know a lot of students actually like their full-time job is applying to scholarships all the time. That's basically all they do. And a lot of them, that's how they get some of their money. That being said, a lot of this, the tuition costs are covered through student loans. So universities and colleges will offer student loans to help students cover the tuition and their cost of attendance. So sometimes, like tuition isn't the only thing that's involved. That's the actual payment to the school, but the cost of attendance is everything else that goes into it. So I'm gonna walk you guys through all of these different like pieces of information. And like I said, depending on which type of college or university you want to attend, generally the tuition will kind of match the prestige of the university or the college. So if you're going to a community college, generally that type of education is much more affordable. Something like a Cal State is, a little bit more expensive. However, they do qualify you for, a greater range of degrees. And then you have the UC system, which is a very research oriented. So if a student is going to attend there, generally their work ends up having some kind of relationship with research or further education might be required. They may actually end up having to bridge into a master's program or a PhD program. Then you also have your Ivy Leagues, like the creme de la creme, if you want to like put it that way in education. And that would be like Harvard, Stanford, et cetera, et cetera. So That being said, you can kind of, if, for example, you're a parent or a student, kind of comparing different prices between institutions that accepted you, and you're wondering, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? I'm here just to do a general breakdown of my own alma mater for undergraduate attendance, which is UC Santa Barbara, and I'm going to be using the information that they already have available online and just kind of like talking a little bit about each point and giving my own take on like the cost of a BA. I think that you know, a lot of people have a lot of concerns regarding paying for their education, not just how am I going to figure this out? How am I going to pay for this? How am I going to, survive when I can barely afford tuition? But on top of it, they have concerns about opening up themselves to debt and having that debt be carried, carrying that debt for a really long period in their life, and whether getting certain degrees is worth it or not. Not only that, but a lot of students have, concerns about a lot of miseducation that's going on online. They may be getting discouraged by third parties that say, you know what, you don't need this or that to do this or that kind of career. And, I'm here to just break it down for you and give my opinion on it and the cost and what is worth spending money on and what perhaps is not worth spending any money on. So, without further ado, I'm just going to switch the kind of view that we see here on this video, and then we'll continue. All right. So, what we have here is a screenshot of the University of California, Santa Barbara Office of the Registrar website. I hope you can see it clearly. And essentially, if you go to their homepage, you select tuition and fees. You can even do a quick Google search and it should come up. It'll look something like this, and you'll have a breakdown that generally will break tuition down between undergraduate and graduate. So, undergraduate is anything after high school, but before or around like for getting a 4-year degree, like getting your bachelor's degree is considered undergraduate level studies. Then you have resident versus non-resident. This, I've actually met students that didn't calculate their residency when they attended their college or university, and they miscalculated the cost of attendance because where you live really does matter. If you are accepted to a UC and say you're also accepted to the University of Boston, there's a big difference in tuition if you are already a resident of the state of California versus if you are going to attend, say, University of Boston, they're going to actually charge you as a non-resident for that state. And so the tuition can really vary based off of that factor. Then sometimes if the university is being generous and like trying to be transparent, they will generally open themselves up to listing a few years of tuition costs so that you can see how much tuition has changed, give or take ballpark 5 years. Some of them are exceptionally good and they may have additional links for you to be able to look at older years and see the progress there for maybe if you're doing like a research project on tuition costs over the last decade or so, and you need more information than what they currently have posted. Sometimes they will make themselves available to give you that information, or they'll have additional links somewhere towards the bottom of the page. You can go ahead and like check that out if you really want to and you need it for something else. So I just selected undergraduate resident 2025. So if you were to get accepted at a UC, ballparking, this would be kind of like an average of what almost any UC would be asking for tuition for a California resident in the year 2025. So if you're an incoming student, this is generally pretty accurate information. And then they will break things up into tuition and fees. For UC Santa Barbara, they actually run in a quarter schedule, which means that they break their school year down into four quarters. Generally, it's fall, winter, spring, and then you have summer. In this actual web page, there is no listing for summer. Sometimes some schools will list it, sometimes they don't, and you'll have to try to find a way of getting that information separately. Because generally, most schools will only operate and consider a full school year the 9 months. And this is something similar to K through 12. It'll be sometime between September and running all the way through late June, early July. So give or take 9 months. Summer is optional. So most students do not attend summer school. That's why they generally go home during those months every single year. Sometimes, if the student decides, I'm going to keep going to school even in the summer and take extra credits, the tuition gets recalculated and you can apply for additional funding for this, and your tuition will get covered. So, really start thinking about late winter, early spring if you're going to want to attend summer school and catch up on credits or even do additional credits to graduate sooner or get an additional certification or whatever your goal is. Start thinking about whether you are going to want to attend school during summer is my recommendation, because if you look at these numbers, it's still a significant amount of money that you're going to have to figure out how to budget. And my advice is, if need be, start calling people and getting advice from the Office of Registrar and any other office that's able to give you information on how to figure that out. So, tuition costs for each quarter. If you see here, ballparking it is about 4,500 per quarter. This actually is for the cost of attending the school itself. So this includes full-time attendance, and full-time attendance is minimum of 12 units. I actually think this kind of tuition is very affordable. A community college, from what I have noticed, will generally cost you of about 1,200 for a full schedule, and or sometimes they really calculate based off of the units that you're going to be enrolled in. And they also tend to break the school year separately. So one school year, 9 months, gets broken down into two quarters. So you'll generally have fall and spring. And to be honest with you, it would be sometime like fall would be sometime early September or September all the way through December. And then spring semester would be early spring or late winter, early spring, all the way through early summer, which is like June, July. So they only break it down into two. You really have to look at and consider if the schedule itself might be too rigorous for you if you're going to attend in a quarter. And based off of my personal opinion, like my personal experience, a lot of students really struggle with the pace at, going so quickly through courses. They really struggle with this like quarterly system. So I would really take that into consideration if you're like debating or like comparing and contrasting two or more different schools. The next thing on this line here is the non-resident supplemental tuition. Uh, like I said, residency, where you're coming from, like what state you originally resided in is taken into consideration. I selected resident because I'm obviously a resident of California. So this non-resident supplemental tuition would have zero all the way through and should have zero all the way through. Professional degree supplemental tuition. This would generally be like anything outside of undergraduate work that qualifies as like supplemental tuition that you're taking. And here it has zero all the way through. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes if you want to take summer school and take an additional set of courses to qualify for a particular kind of certificate, as far as I'm aware, this might change. So contact, administration, the office of registrar, and check if this changes at all. If you are going to be taking certain kinds of courses to qualify for certain types of certifications. Student services fee, 444 for each quarter. AS fees, student lock-in fees, 684.96. And by the way, the student services fee and the AS fees are things like events that are put together for students, services that are available for students. I believe there are like certain kinds of clubs that get funding through these guys, so everyone pitches in to help. And but to be honest with you, occasionally these kinds of labels, like what they call the fee, changes because whatever they're paying for tends to change. So double check exactly what you're paying for. Um, However, most of the time you are not able to opt out. So this is generally, the cost of college life, cost of university life. Like this is all the fun stuff that is included in going and attending these universities. Collaborate student technology fee, $50 all the way through. Double check because I think this is actually to make technology available all throughout the university and or internet. So again, you're welcome to like double check what exactly this covers. And then everybody's favorite Gaucho Health Service. So usually it should be pretty transparent how much you're paying per quarter for health insurance. This insurance is costing you 1,242 per quarter. I have had to pay for like three different types of health insurances at Cal State level, UC level, and also from a personal, from a third party employer. And this for about ballparking at 3 months to me seems pretty fair because nowadays for the type of coverage the UC Gaucho system, like the UC health system offers, which is pretty comprehensive, especially for undergraduates, they're covering a lot. They include full medical, full dental, believe like full emergency services, literally almost everything and anything. And you generally do not have to pay very much, if at all, for medication that is available for student illnesses or treatments. So this generally you want to double check if you have a better offer from a parent or a sibling or somebody at home, or you just want to like see if you qualify for Medi-Cal, Medicaid, Obamacare, whatever it is, just compare the rates per month because remember, the fall quarter covers you from September all the way through December. And then you get like the UCSA, UCGPC fee, which is optional. I believe this is like the fee that you have to pay for any like union fees or like like major student organizations that like oversee all the activities for students. So this is actually to help them manage all of that because those students also need to get paid and like you need to like every student needs to collaborate for that. So my recommendation for things like the student services fee, the AS fee, and the UCSA fee, double check exactly what they cover. Totals. For one quarter, like say for example, fall, they broke it down to 6,959 with 44. So to go to school and attend, you know, a full quarter is ballparking at $7,000 per year total. They break things down. For year total tuition runs about 13,602 with a total for the year of 20,876. If we look at here at the section at the bottom, it does explain that, you can have more accurate information on what it's going to cost you to attend a UC, for example. Sorry. In your gold account, you can click the registration tab and they will have an additional breakdown for you. They do give a disclaimer, especially, I've noticed this, especially after COVID, that, sometimes some of the courses may switch from being in person to being delivered remotely. And that has always been the case for a UC system. They are charging based off of the quality of the education, based off of the quality of the professors, based off of the, all the various services that are available on campus. Because these fees here for student services and the student activities include a wide range of services from psychology all the way to career services to technology services to tutoring services, computer labs. They include events that you can attend for art, drama, theater, etc., etc. But, that being the case, they are heavy, like all of these activities are heavily filtered. And so what they do end up doing is charging for quality. That that also includes like holistically charging the same amount for in-person tuition, like in-person courses and courses that are being delivered remotely. That's not always the same at college or at a different level. For example, sometimes you may have something different at a community college or at a Cal State. And like I was saying earlier, summer cost of attendance can be found. Usually they'll have a link or more information. It's here at the bottom for this campus. And then you have an additional set of fee details that you can like look up at the Office of Registrar website. So that is one breakdown that I wanted to share with you guys regarding this. And I'm going to actually pause and upload a second one so we can kind of continue to chat. And you, all right. So I had to restart this and re-record some of it because I lost the previous recording. Oh well. Anyways, round three, let's go. So this PDF here really does break down the cost of attendance differently than the previous web page that I showed you guys. This is for undergrad 2024 cohort, cost of attendance for the year 2024 through 2025. This should be changing if you're going to be starting the school year 2025 and your year runs all the way through 2026. But generally it doesn't change too much over the course of the summer. So you'll see a bigger change over the course of like maybe a decade or so because of inflation and costs of attendance and costs of living change in different cities, et cetera, et cetera. But I really also wanted to take a closer look at this page in particular because it breaks down the cost of attendance differently than the previous website. And I actually like this PDF much better than the previous website because this is taking into consideration living costs, right? Like actual like rent and where you're going to live and how you're going to like structure your living situation based off of attending a UC for undergraduate studies. So this is basically like freshman all the way through, like completing your bachelor's degree. And what I like about this PDF is that it breaks down the tuition, the cost of attendance with residential fees, like with cost of living, cost of housing, depending on different options that you want to take. So the way that you need to think about this is that a lot of people are going to be attending UC, a UC campus, you know, as their first school as freshmen, fresh out of high school, 18 years old. And they, worked pretty hard, I hope, into getting into these universities. And so most of the incoming students will probably be university freshmen with, the desire to live in residence halls. And for some place like UC Santa Barbara, I believe they have like I think like five options for freshmen. So really double check. You will get an option to select early on, like a few months before the school starts, you'll get an option to select which housing you want, and then you can start taking additional costs of like living and additional expenses into consideration for that if you're going to choose a residence hall, like food and all of that good stuff. But this gives you a ballpark summary of how much it's going to cost to live on campus if you're an incoming freshman and you're 18 years old, give or take. This breaks down the cost of attendance in a much more comprehensive manner that I actually prefer than the previous website. The previous website broke down tuition a little bit differently. So you'll notice this cost of attendance number might be a bit different because they're lumping in a couple of those previous categories, like the tuition and the student services fee, et cetera, all into the cost of tuition. So this is the part where you really have to pay attention to what they're lumping together. And if you're really particular with the numbers, which I know a lot of people are, especially if they have to take student loans and or they're having like other people help them with like covering fees and things like that, they really do like to know exactly how they're categorizing the different fees. Tuition is different here because they're lumping in a couple of those other student services fees into this tuition section here. Campus fees. Also, some of those like student fees are included in these campus fees. So these are two categories that you really want to like look with a critical eye and see where exactly the breakdown from the previous website is like fitting into these two categories. But if you do the math, and I have done the math in the past regarding this, usually the number will add up. Something that you have to take into consideration for cost of attendance is books and supplies. This is, in my opinion, a very like a tight budget for books and supplies. Because depending on the type of major that you're trying to complete and depending on the type of like how much reading you're going to have to do and how expensive the books are for the type of reading that you're doing and how hard it is to buy the books independently from third-party sources or like maybe even just like bookstores or whatever it is. It might be really difficult to find used books and you may have to buy brand new books and some books I've seen textbooks run upwards of $200. So for 3/4 of textbooks that might run up to $200, and this is a very, very like tight budget. On top of that, we're not really considering in this section that some of the requirements for the course might require you to borrow books or materials from other universities that may need to get copied or sent over, and there might be fees associated to that. If you're in, doing a project for a particular class and you need to pay for movies or, get copy of certain like audio tapes or whatever it is, this number is going to be this is a tight budget for that. Okay, so keep that into consideration. On top of it, I was in, a literature, comparative literature, English major, and I can tell you for like a certainty that not all the books are easily acquired, and sometimes you may need to buy new books, and sometimes you may need to buy like additional resources that are just not easily available. So you might be forced to actually pay out of pocket for a lot of the extra books and research materials. Living expenses. Okay, most people are living off of this number. So this number is, in my opinion, if you can survive 12 months out of 12 months with like $20,000 overall, like that includes food, clothing, necessities, et cetera, et cetera. This $20,000 budget is like very, very tight. I think even some part-time employees make more money than this. Some. But this is really like you cannot live off of this number. Transportation costs. If you need to go anywhere, you need to get an Uber for whatever reason, get a bus pass, get a train ticket, move yourself around. This is definitely not going to cover an automobile payment for per month for a year, let alone, it may cover some like miscellaneous transportation that you need to do or insurance if you have a car already, right? A lot of students decide that they want to get a part-time job and, supplement like living expenses, transportation costs, and other personal expenses with a part-time job. Just be careful because you might be distracting yourself from going to school in order to supplement these areas, and you might end up having to struggle anyways because it's going to pull attention from what the focus is, which is your studies. UC Student Health Service. So compare this number with the other one that I showed you guys. This should include the health insurance. This cost is already like adding everything per year. This includes the full year, so this will cover you all year round. Includes summer. I believe, and you might need to double check this, but I believe it also covers you for emergency situations if you get hurt internationally, and if you're traveling or whatever, this might actually kick in. It's pretty good for an entire year for 4,000 for what they cover, which is pretty comprehensive, and the minimal, if any, out-of-pocket expenses. 4,000 is good. Again, compare and contrast with how much or how good you're going to be covered if you qualify for Medi-Cal, Medicaid, or even a parental or a spousal insurance, whether this might actually be more worth it or less worth it. Personal expenses. Personal expenses, they are ballparking it at 2,145. Keep in mind, if you do decide to work and you need to dress a particular way, this is going to go into that. And what is also you need to calculate is whether you're going to need to add any additional supplies, technological supplies like a new laptop, flash drives, any kind of supportive material that will make your life easier in order to get all the academic stuff done. Phone. This is not going to cover the expense of a phone. This is probably just for a very conservative phone service. Do not try to skip all this. I actually myself like tried to budget on this here, and it's not going to work because even though the university has Wi-Fi, believe it or not, sometimes in some areas it's not that great. And you just want to have your own service, full coverage, full internet at your disposal at all times, because a lot of the courses and course requirements need to be submitted. Everything like a lot of the things need to be submitted online and require internet. So you do not want to find yourself in a situation where you're having internet issues and your professor does not accept at all, late arrivals or missing even a minute of class. Like some professors are extremely serious about that. And if you're going to have problems with internet, you're going to quickly realize, especially for courses that are incredibly, incredibly hard to get into, you do not want to miss a minute. You're going to realize very quickly that having backup internet is a 100% a necessity. You do not want to like skimp out on some of these things to cut costs. It might just end up backfiring and hurting you in your academics. So the total cost here for living in a residential hall, say you're like an 18-year-old incoming freshman, would be around 44,568 if you're a California resident. So if you are a non-resident, they would add on the supplemental tuition, which is a total of 78,768. They can afford to charge this much because a UC system is universally, like it's globally well known, and there are a lot of students with wealthy parents who can afford to pay this for their student to go to this type of university. So really take that into consideration in terms of like what you're paying for. Residential halls are very good for students that are like graduating from high school, really young adults, and are not really ready or prepared to live on their own 100%. This is a way of bridging a student into adulthood, but still creating a supportive environment in which they can get all their academics and still continue to focus on achieving, you know, academic excellence, good grades, and meeting the requirements for their degrees. That being said, a lot of students do decide to go to a U system and apply and get in a little bit later in life and or with other responsibilities. For example, they might be married, they might have children already, they might be a little bit older, and so they might already be used to living independently and or having their own private space with their family. So they do offer tuition breakdowns and cost of attendance breakdowns for people that want to get their own private housing and or still live in an apartment setting, but through the university. So university undergraduate apartments versus like off-campus private housing. It really depends on how independent you want to be and how much farther away from the main campus you're okay with living. The undergraduate apartments are apartments that basically are for people that are either married or have an entire family already, and but still want to stay close to campus for whatever reason. It's just more convenient for them to stick closer to campus. And so they break down this cost of living differently. Now, say for example, you have a spouse, you have a family, and you decide, I think it's better for us to live a little bit farther from campus because, say, my spouse has a job that requires them to drive farther, and we just want to be like at an equal distance. A lot of students will select this private housing option. And something that I want you to pay attention to is that the living expenses is what's changing in these two different sections, these two different boxes here. Um, in my opinion, I think these living expenses are very, very conservative. Like they are low. I really think they should actually be higher than the living expenses at residence halls because the only type of students that I've noticed will select these two options are students that already have spouses and or children. These living expenses are going to be significantly higher if you are married and you have children. So 15,000, 16,000, 13,000. I think that's very, very low. You might want to recalculate this independently and take that into consideration. Transportation costs also may vary, right? They actually bump it up from 927 to about 1,395. Again, it depends on where you're living, right? This might actually be better suited to the 1,395 if you're living at undergraduate apartments and you have a vehicle. If you're living farther than, the city where your campus is at, you're maybe living in an adjacent city, or you have to drive anywhere upwards of 35 minutes to an hour, hour and a half, or even more, then this transportation cost is going to go up. You really need to calculate if it's worth living that far away from campus. The other thing that you want to take into consideration that I think is should have been bumped up is the personal expenses situation. It got bumped up from 2,145 to about 2,304 for off-campus housing and for undergraduate apartments. I still think this is quite low. You never know. These days, if an emergency happens, you need to have a little bit of wiggle room. And if you have a spouse or children, this is a very conservative number. I would actually try to budget for something higher for these two options. Again, if you have a spouse or children, the phone expense for a service might actually be more expensive for this off-campus private housing and this phone for the undergraduate apartments, especially because the types of students that accept these two options generally will not be the same as the resident hall students. And then you also have the living at home situation. So this is UC Santa Barbara we're talking about here. This is a really wealthy area. It's quite expensive to live there, to live in Goleta. And you know, if you have the privilege of having a parent that lives in the city or nearby, for example, I would recommend number one, take advantage of it if possible. However, you also have to consider that this is like all of tuition, a cost of attendance might be a little bit different for you because they are assuming that your parents pay less for housing. And so this number actually might be much higher than even this residence hall section if you guys really sit down and do the math together, whether, this is an option for you. Something to think about is like, the living expenses. You might actually get away with spending less because you have, you're living at home and you have that support. The transportation costs, if you're living around the campus, keep in mind you get free bus rides. So unless you're taking a really expensive form of transportation, this number should be a little bit lower. But they do calculate for parking and all of that. So in these kinds of like transportation costs. So UC Student Health, it's a little bit more expensive than, oh, actually, it's about the same. Sorry. And then personal expenses, 2,535. So this is likely where they're calculating the fact that Goleta and Santa Barbara are a little bit more expensive. So they bumped up this number quite a bit. And for the phone service, 285. This is a conservative number, okay? As opposed to like residence halls. And you want to, again, my recommendation is do sit down with parents or whoever else is at home and do the math regarding actual rent costs and living costs because this number for whatever city that the particular UC campus is at might you might actually be paying quite a lot more than what it would be if you were living at a residence hall. The reason why these tuitions tend to be a little bit more expensive than, say, for example, a Cal State and significantly more expensive than a community college is because there are fewer UC campuses available at UC level within the state of California. And then, the range of type of certifications, degrees, et cetera, that are available on each campus vary. And generally, the quality tends to be better and also a little bit different than a Cal State. They also tend to aim more for research. So they orient students to think about their education as a long-term investment in which they might potentially need to extend to graduate studies and even PhDs for the purpose of research or other kinds of research related work. Cal States tend to be a little bit different in regards to that. That's why they are structured different. They are also, you know, they often also aim to prepare students in a different way for career paths. So sometimes they're somewhere in between research and like vocational schools. So they tend to prepare students to do certain types of jobs, but not necessarily research oriented jobs. Although, they can help students bridge into UCs. That being said, like community colleges are also less expensive because there are far more community colleges available within the state of California, within any state, than, say, a state university. So almost every city has their own community college. And that's why generally then they tend to be less expensive. On top of that, the types of certifications and qualifications are much more limited and they don't generally offer as many services on campus as these sort of like bigger Cal State or UC campuses do offer. The reason why these tuition costs are also higher is because these are mini cities. So everything that is required of you, like to live, is going to be within walking distance. So food, tutoring, entertainment, events, to like did I say tutoring or anything? I did say tutoring. Everything is going to be like within walking distance. So if you need help with any kind of like health stuff, you name it, like it's supposed to be made like the entire UC campus is functions to support students in their academic goals without having them to go to extreme lengths or drive 50 miles to get any kind of specific service. So really, these are hubs where you can really focus on your academics, and that's the only thing that you are supposed to actually be doing. Community colleges are not necessarily at that level. So it really just depends on the community college, but for the most part, there is much more driving around. You know, stuff tends to be like not as readily available for students, and student life tends to be different. So really consider, compare and contrast what it is that you're going for and what it is that you think you're going to need, right? And what else do I want to add? I mean, that's pretty much it. I think this PDF also includes the 2023 cohort, 2022 cohort, 2021 cohort. So they do tend to break it down, and you can see how it's been changing over the course, and it went up quite a few quite a few years later, it's all the way up to 44,000. So we're taking into consideration inflation, and other elements that are part of the like economy. Um, Something else that like you need to consider when looking at these numbers is that for the particular state that you're living in, you need to ask yourself if this is a reasonable salary somebody would have if they were living independently and or with roommates and or with a whole family, because the cost of living in California is quite high. It's quite expensive. So this number here for all the services that you're getting within walking distance, the fact that you're focusing solely on your academics, and you know a lot of this also includes already like living and food packages and activities that you're able to do and attend for free on campus. Consider that this amount might actually be it's quite a good deal. And also consider the kind of focus that you're going to require to complete the assignments or the work or the classes or the checkpoints for your particular degree. So some, students are have highly impacted, highly demanding majors. So the pace at which they learn is much different. And I know of so many students that got filtered out within a couple of weeks, within a couple of classes or a couple of tests from, STEM major courses. And, they had to either retake courses or figure out if they were gonna switch majors because it was so demanding. And something you want to consider is that this all of these costs are solely for the to facilitate your success, because you do not want to be like budgeting all the time and cutting costs and like living, you don't want to be cutting food expenses and end up hungry all the time, because that is going to hurt your tuition. Like that's going to hurt your academic performance, and you're going to end up losing money on this tuition investment if you cannot focus, if you are not sleeping well because you're living in a like crappy place. And so really consider that this is all geared for you to be at your best physically, mentally, academically at all times. So for the sole intent purpose of completing your courses and achieving your academic goals. And the same applies if you're already married and or you have children, right? So these budget breakdowns need to take that in consideration. And I would modify this depending on your living situation as much as you need. If you're fortunate enough to live at home and have parents support you, this also is going to be a little bit different for people. How does all of this get paid? You know, you have things like Pell Grants and other federal grants that will help you cover the cost of this, and they tend to break everything down per year for you on your financial aid package. And then they do also offer select student loans amount at reasonable, in my opinion, reasonable rates. of about 3 or 4% was when I actually and was enrolled at the UC system, and they will break things down for you, like educate you on repayment plans, how they tend to break that down for students once they graduate. They will have like 10-year to 25-year payback plans at different rates for, whatever you decide or however you decide you want to start paying back your loans. You generally qualify for about 6 months of grace period. In my opinion, I think that's an incredibly short period of time because of the way that the economy is structured now. I think to get a good job in order to pay any of these loans, it takes upwards of a year and a half. Realistically, it's very, very tough to get a job within 6 months, 3 to 6 months of graduating. And I would not start looking for a job until you are 100% fully graduated because you never know. You might actually think that you're going to graduate or you're going to pass all your courses and something might go wrong the last minute. So you do want to wait nearly until you're done graduating. It's almost, you're almost done, if not completely done, and then start applying and looking. And also take into consideration how the economy is at the time of your graduation. Personally, like I said, I think 6 months is not enough time. I think we should extend this, the grace period, because of the way that the job market is structured. And so, one option that you do have, if you have the blessing and the privilege of having supportive parents or anyone else in your family to help you, you do have the option to co-sign your student loans or get parent loans. That way, some of the burden gets lifted off of you from having to pay all of this on your own. That, no shame on that. Like it's incredibly expensive to attend a university like this. So if you are, you know, doing well academically or actually passing your courses and getting along great in your academic experience, and you have the support of parents to help you co-sign or cover the costs through a parent loan, do that because it is incredibly, incredibly challenging to take on this kind of, a journey on your own without support. And no shame in taking that like privilege, and like using it for this. I believe that is pretty much it. I hope this was a helpful breakdown of the cost of attendance, the tuition, the different fees that are included and that you should be considering. I would go ahead and do a little bit of research if you are considering, your journey and you've been accepted at different types of universities. If you have an acceptance at a Cal State versus a UC, really sit down and think about it, where you want to take your career and how far you want to take your career and what you want to do eventually, because it might just be worth like looking at your different options. On top of that, like I mentioned, the pace is completely different in community college, Cal State settings versus a UC setting. So this is not a good investment for students that are thinking they might struggle with a quarter system because they go incredibly, incredibly fast and it's incredibly demanding. So really consider what your career goals are and your learning style and the type of student you are, because even though this is generally pretty, you know, a great deal for research and like certain types of future work, if you can wrangle like a similar journey at a Cal State for a little bit of less cost, seriously consider that. At the same time, I'm going to be very honest. The UC system is very, very tough to get into. So if you did get into it, and you worked very hard for 12 years and you come from an underrepresented background and you were able to secure acceptance out of like diversity or equity from diversity or equity measures, and you got here after proving through like an exceptional track record of academic excellence over the course of your, educational career, which is like 12 years, that you deserve to be at a UC. I would go ahead and take this opportunity, especially because the government is acknowledging your academic excellence and giving you the opportunity to fund this through student loans if you do not have any other options. This is what you worked for, right? Like, this is what these 12 plus years are what you worked for. And if you transferred into a UC because you needed to take a few years, like at a different college or university to bridge into, this is what you worked for. The level of academic excellence that's demanded from this type of UC system is, it's up there. And yes, it's still, the system itself requires a lot of work. There are a lot of things that are wrong with it, just like any other, like, you know, employment location or academic school. But if you worked for this level of excellence, really, really consider it. I actually think, you would be cheating yourself if after having worked for so hard, you didn't take this opportunity. I am going to move on to like talking about something similar, like a similar breakdown with the master's degree program in a different video. And I'm going to use my own alma mater example, Cal State Dominguez Hills, to break this sort of cost down for a master's degree. And I will be talking a little bit more about this in a different video. So I hope that you actually stick around and like follow, subscribe to catch that video later on. But I think that's it for now for this video. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Share with your friends, with your contacts. And I really appreciate you taking the time to go over this with me. I hope this was helpful. I will catch you next time. Bye bye.